With more than 25 years of experience working as a school psychologist and a neuropsychologist, I have found that families and patients commonly have the same questions. Questions about how the brain works and how the diagnostic system works, and questions and frustrations about how the special education system works and how to get a child help if they're struggling in school. So that's what these presentations will be about. We're going to have one today on the diagnostic system and the brain. Then we'll have a second that focuses on the special education systems and how to navigate those and get children support when they're struggling in school. The format is as follows. I've asked patients of mine, former patients of mine, to write down questions or bring forth concepts that they found valuable during their evaluation process. And I will review those and answer those or respond to those here today. I don't believe diagnosis shopping is a real thing. What's actually happening is these are good parents, these are good individuals, these are good kids that are trying to navigate a very broken system where the system says the word is the tools that you will get. So what good parents do is they say, I don't care what the word is, what the diagnosis is, I just want the tools that my kid needs to be successful. Who could ever blame a parent for that approach? The reality is it's the system of diagnosis itself that is very, very broken. Not the families, not the kids. It is a systemic problem, and that is at the heart of understanding exceptional in our movement. It's really looking at these systems critically and figuring out ways where we can make the systems better for all so that everyone's human experience is the best experience possible. With effort, people deserve success, period. All right, next question. So what is ADHD really? Why are so many diagnosed with ADHD, and what are the best treatments? All right, a 3-for-1 question there. So already gone into a lot of this as it relates to the sensory regulatory systems and that continuum. The reality is that there are numerous things that can disrupt our regulatory functioning. And that's really what ADHD is. So, so many people are diagnosed because the regulatory system is so easy to disrupt. If we're super hungry, that disrupts our ability to pay attention. If we're frustrated, it can disrupt our ability to pay attention and to organize our approach to thinking and learning. And the list goes on and on and on. So the reason why everyone watching this knows somebody that's been diagnosed with ADHD, that was the first dart they threw at the dartboard for me. So we've all been there. We all know somebody with an ADHD diagnosis. And frankly, if you're an intelligent human being, you've probably experienced quite a bit of variability in your ability to pay attention. When things aren't super interesting or meaningful or relevant, it's really hard for a powerful sensory brain to regulate that power. So since the regulatory system is kicked offline so easily, and the first thing that tends to go away is your ability to sustain attention. The second thing that tends to happen is we get restless or disorganized. This is why, because it's right at the beginning of that continuum, so many are diagnosed with ADHD. So it kind of makes sense because it's at the very, very start. So that's why so many are diagnosed. And then the final part to the question was, what are the best treatments? Well, in every case, and I firmly believe this, there are natural mechanisms for changing brain functioning, brain chemistry, and on and on. The big four that we talk about, and we'll go much deeper into these through the Understanding Exceptional community. The big four are really fuel for the brain. So what we eat and what we drink are very, very important. So fuel is essential for any vehicle, right? Number 2 is exercise. Exercise is profoundly impactful in terms of brain chemistry and brain functioning. A little bit of exercise most days of the week goes so far to recalibrating brain chemistry and supporting regulatory and sensory and motor functioning. So exercise is critically important. The next one is sleep. Sleep is critically important for rebalancing brain chemistry and getting the regulatory and sensory systems back online. So our sleep habits and patterns are critical to our overall brain performance. And it's something we absolutely have to manage in our own lives. And then the final one is sensations. There are various sensory inputs whether it's things we hear, things we smell, things we feel, movements, any of these sensory inputs. For all human beings, some sensory inputs are highly regulating. They're producing neurochemicals that help us to regulate the other sensory systems and the motor systems. So if we use sensation as a methodology for self-regulation, we're now into those natural realms of recalibrating what the brain is doing and how it's functioning. So again, the big four that we always look at before Big Pharma tells us to go fill this prescription, the big four are fuel, what we eat and drink; exercise, important to get a little bit each day; sleep, critically important, get a routine going; and sensory inputs. Those are the keys. If through a recalibration process where we're using natural means, if that's not working, and there's other supplements, and by the way, nothing I say today is medical advice. I don't want anyone to watch this video and pull their kid or themselves off of medication. I am never giving you medical advice. I'm talking on purely neurological levels and providing information, perspective, context. Always consult with a trusted medical provider before making any medical decisions. So I wanted to absolutely get that out there. So returning, there's also supplements and various things that we can do to promote self-regulation. Ultimately, at the end of the day, for most people that are diagnosed with ADHD, the issue lies in regulation and enhancing the ability to regulate. And it's enhancing the ability to inhibit. So even a stimulant, which is kind of counterintuitive, we're going to stimulate the brain. What we're actually stimulating, if a stimulant works, we're stimulating the brakes or the inhibitory systems. So we're not stimulating just the brain itself, we're stimulating the systems that help us to inhibit. And so that's why when a stimulant works, the mechanisms by which it works are related to the inhibitory systems, which is also why a percentage of those who are provided with stimulant medications, when it's not the right medication, might show extra sensory activity or sensory motor activity. So if you have a child or you yourself have started a stimulant medication, commonly the medical practitioner will suggest that one of the side effects could be tics. Could be difficulties with sleeping, but tics is that overactivation of the sensory system that spills onto the motor systems and out it comes. So treatment in all cases should always begin with the big four, the natural mechanisms. That's not to say medications can't and won't be helpful. In many cases they are, and they are needed. But that should always be at the end of the line in terms of consideration. Medication should always be at the end of the line, and it almost always is with parents. But there are times where once we've exhausted all this other stuff, we've tried recalibrating the natural ways, there are options that may really be fundamental life changers for humans and really alter their human experience in positive ways. The last thing I'll say, since I'm on this topic of medication, is for me, in my practice and my beliefs and in my communicating with my families, medication enters the realm of consideration when all else has been exhausted and when our neurology, the way our brain has developed or the way it's functioning, is out of our control and negatively impacting what we think about ourselves and our ability to be successful. So when our brains are chipping away at our self-esteem, now anything and everything should be on the table as long as we're going through a progression of remedies and interventions. All right, next slide. All right, so interesting one, and we've already touched on this, so I don't know how much time we'll spend on it here, but the next question is, why are so many more individuals being diagnosed with autism? And where is autism in the brain? And another three-parter, how do parents or individuals get help once they're diagnosed? Really, really important questions. And the reality is that autism has gained a ton of attention of late, rightfully so, because more and more people are being diagnosed and more people are presenting with the behaviors associated with it. But there's a couple of caveats here. So to the first question, why are so many more individuals being diagnosed? In pop culture and in society, there's things being thrown around. Well, it's medication, or it's Tylenol, or people are just trying to look for a definitive point to look back to. That is the cause, and we're not going to find that. And here's why: because the diagnosis itself or the condition itself isn't defined. It is on literally a spectrum or continuum. And when you have a diagnosis that's on a spectrum or a continuum, what happens is that continuum is so vast that you can really start putting a lot of different behaviors onto that continuum. And you can therefore begin upping the diagnostic process or the number of people you diagnose. So that may play a part in it. I'm not saying that's it. But the fact that we don't have a good definition of autism is incredibly problematic. With all of this research being done and we're trying to discover what's causing it, the biggest problem is we can't agree on what it is. So how are we going to figure out what's causing it? And now we start going down these different roads of, is it environmental? Is it genetic? Is it Tylenol? Is it vaccines? The reality is that any and all of those, I think, at some level could play a role. But we must first sort of drill down on what it is. So let's just very briefly talk about what it is or how it's viewed in the clinical world. So, and this won't be exact, but essentially autism spectrum disorder is diagnosed when an individual manifests patterns of developmental differences, and they need to be evident pretty early on, but that can present in various ways. An individual exhibits patterns of neurodevelopmental differences, which result in behavioral differences, brain behavior, of course, that may result in things like repetitive thought patterns or becoming stuck in one's thinking. It may result in sensory overexcitabilities, so aversions to certain sensations or avoidance, and then finding other sensory inputs or sensations very calming or relaxing. So you have sensory seeking and sensory avoiding, all to recalibrate brain chemistry. So we have an individual whose brain tends to get stuck in various lines of thinking, and this is why so many that are properly diagnosed have areas of interest that they're just locked into, and they're usually just absolutely amazing in those areas. But that's where that comes from. There's a very, very powerful brain system behind that, and it's hard to regulate. And man, when they get on that, Freudian slip there with we, but when an individual with this brain pattern gets onto that line of thinking, the regulatory and the sensory system are locked together and hyper-focused, hyper-knowledgeable. This is why learning in these areas for these kiddos goes so very well, so we have that repetitive thinking pattern, the sensory overexcitabilities, which is viewed through sensory seeking, sensory avoidance. And then we tend to see aspects of motor outflow, so repetitive movements, or they call them stereotyped repetitive movements. And again, going back to that repetitive thinking, they call that perseverative or repetitive or it's all the same. It's just a brain, it's a behavior, right? It's starting in the brain. It's sticky thinking from a powerful brain. So we have those repetitive thoughts. We have the sensory piece. We have the potentially repetitive movements. The more classic ones that are sort of well known are, sometimes rocking or flapping hands, each of which gives vestibular and proprioceptive inputs that are very calming. All of these behaviors serve a purpose that has to be understood. I think that's been ignored for too long. Behavior cannot exist without a brain, and it provides communication related to a person's internal experience and something they might be seeking. So these repetitive behaviors serve a purpose. Doesn't mean they're ideal, and in some cases we may want to change them, but they serve a purpose. And until we get to that idea that we just need to get rid of it, that's not going to work, because it was serving a purpose. We have to replace it. We have to replace whatever the brain was receiving through that behavior. It needs to be replaced. It can't just be, let's just stop that behavior, which becomes very, very problematic. And there's going to be people that disagree with me throughout this project, and I welcome that, whether it's the diagnostic piece or whatever. Anything I'm talking about, debate, conversation stimulates evolution and progress. So I'm open to all that. Getting derailed. So we've got repetitive thought patterns, perseveration, and we have sensory overexcitabilities, we have potentially some repetitive movements, and then we have disruptions to daily living and social functioning that accompany those three prior areas. And so at the end of the day, for me, autism spectrum disorder, it really comes down to what does a child need, and are their needs consistent with what the diagnosis will get them? So in other words, if you have a scenario where you have a kiddo who maybe they have some repetitive thought patterns, and maybe they're a little bit more active, but they're just a social rock star, well, that's not a need, and so autism spectrum disorder wouldn't be in the realm of consideration. But there's so many cases where kids are in the gray area, and in fact, it is unbelievably and inexcusably common for psychologists, psychiatrists, school psychologists, school teams, for all of these individuals to disagree about what it's called rather than agree. So then who is right? And this is sort of, again, reflecting the broken diagnostic system, because the diagnostic system is far from exact. We don't have a blood draw, we don't have a cheek swab. So we've got people arguing over what the word is when what we should be doing is agreeing on what do they need to be happy, healthy, and successful. What tools are needed to support them when they put forth the effort to achieve the outcomes they desire and deserve. And if we work backwards from that, using that sort of method as opposed to behavior, diagnosis, intervention, if we worked from brain, behavior, what do we know we need, to what is the word that the system has created to make sure that we have what we need, I think so many more people would, number one, be okay with the diagnosis itself, and number two, I think there'd be a lot more agreement among professionals. So for me, again, the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder enters the realm of consideration when we've got the sensory piece, the repetitive thinking piece, the motoric piece at some level, and it can vary substantially. And then we also need some tools related to whether it's perspective taking, social communication, social reciprocity, whatever it may be. So it really is based on what are the needs, and does this term get those tools, and do they need those tools? And if they do, let's call it what it needs to be called to get them there. Where is it in the brain was a second. It's the regulatory system. I won't go too far into this right now, but what we're going to find is the regulatory system starts with the lowest structure. It's called the cerebellum. Down here, it goes up to the center of the brain and up to the very front of the brain, and these are the regulatory system. Goes through those areas of the brain and then backwards to the sensory system. So the start of regulation is this structure called the cerebellum. We need to start looking there. I'm telling you right now, anecdotally, there's tons of evidence that when there's disruptions to how the cerebellum is developing or functioning, we see the behavioral profile in varying iterations that is reflected in autism spectrum disorder. It's hugely important that we start looking these directions instead of trying to go backwards from, I think it's an over-the-counter medication or I think it's a vaccination, which those play a role, but the role they're playing is in the brain. And we need to find the brain regions that are becoming inflamed. This is going to come back to inflammation in most cases. So are these things that we're talking about, the over-the-counter medications or vaccines, are they impacting brain development and functioning? And the answer is yes, if we're seeing behaviors that are different. If so, what areas of the brain? And are there individuals that are more likely genetically predisposed, environmentally predisposed to have inflammation in those areas of the brain? So if we knew that going in, if we had a system where we knew the brain systems behind the disorder, as we call it, if we worked from the brain to the behaviors that we see in these disorders, and then figured out what in our environment, what are we doing, what are the genetic properties that increase the likelihood of impacting those areas of the brain, now we can start curing these disorders as opposed to treating them throughout a lifetime. I am so tired of this idea that all these new medications that are developed and produced, shouldn't say all, but most of them, many of them are they're just symptom management, long-term, forever symptom management. Where are the cures? And the reason why, again, that's a whole new discussion. I think the motivations are pretty clear because a lifetime of medication is a lot more expensive than a short intervention that changes your life forever in a positive way. I think we need to get there 100%, and it has to happen. And it's going to take all of us coming together to get there, because there are some powerful systems out there that don't necessarily want that. I'm not saying they're bad people, but there are certainly some motivations that go beyond just what's best for people out there. And we need to make sure we hold those people accountable. We come together as a community and really start looking towards solutions. But we got to know the sources if we're going to get to solutions. How do parents or individuals get help once they're diagnosed? So the thing about autism spectrum disorder is it's becoming, it's very well known, honestly. And so there's lots and lots of resources, both nationally and locally. So whenever there's a diagnosis with a family that I work with, there's tons of resources locally here and nationally. And there's lots of communities. And at the end of the day, I'll end with this on this topic, but it's true for all topics. I always tell my families, your best resources are individuals like yourselves. They are moms and dads who have been down this road, who have a Janie that's now in college and crushing it that was when they were 10 years old, just like your Janie. And so there's huge communities of resources. And maybe, while there's very few, in my opinion, maybe one of the best things about the explosion of social media and the internet and whatnot is the information that's available and the opportunity to connect with others, to form communities of advocacy and strength and connection and communication and support. And so you will almost always find the greatest supports in other parents, even better than those who have all kinds of credentials and books and are hailed as the greatest expert. Parents, they're going to be your greatest resource. You will be for others, and others will be for you. So keep that in mind. Next question. When a family receives a diagnosis, what do you tell them if they are upset or scared? Great question. And this really goes back to this idea of the diagnosis. The system of diagnosing is very, very broken. And the diagnosis itself, I encourage my families to view it as a word that leads you to a set of tools. Because again, we didn't do a blood draw during this neuropsychological evaluation. We didn't do a cheek swab. There was no hair follicle testing. There was no brain imaging. There was nothing that would be considered objective. And so since we're in a subjective realm, then the best way to consider that subjective analysis or that word is an opportunity for tools, for interventions. So I try to encourage my families. It's easy to say, sometimes harder to do, because there's still stigma in society and there's various implications with different diagnoses. And of course, there's those diagnoses that are pretty darn catastrophic. Again, those are in the brain, and we can find solutions to those. I'm telling you right now, things like schizophrenia or some of the more significant like bipolar disorders or the intellectual disabilities, those sorts of things. There are ways to solve these problems, but we have to start in the right location, and we're not. But at the end of the day, so it's easy for me to say, hey, don't worry, it's just a word, and now you can seek out the tools that will be best for your child. And it's a little bit harder pill to swallow for some. But again, if we as a society, as a community, really shift into the word isn't a negative necessarily. Doesn't mean life's super easy. And in fact, we know something in the experience, the human experience, is being negatively impacted. That's why we have these diagnoses. But instead of pointing our fingers and saying, oh my goodness, this is so negative, you have a disability, you have a mental illness, you have a mental disorder. If we got away from the idea that these are absolute pathological concepts and words and realities, they're not pathological in many cases. They are simply reflecting differences. And because no one wants to be mentally ill. Who in the world would want to have a mental illness? And when the book you use literally says mental disorders, and I have to pick something out of this book to get somebody help, Who wants to have a disorder? No one. It's ridiculous. That's the problem right there. Mental illness. These are differences. Sometimes they are very impactful and can be impactful for the totality of an individual's life. But if we get out of the idea of illness, disorder, disability, and into difference, I think many more people would be open to the idea, all right, okay, I've been diagnosed with ADHD or Tourette's disorder, and what's really happening, I got this really powerful brain. It happens to make me very bright. That's certainly not bad. And what I'm being told is that my regulatory systems are struggling to manage my sensory system, so there's things I can do to help kind of cool my sensory systems off. All right, so that's not bad. If we get out of the idea of pathology and into the idea of difference, we're going to do so many more good things for so many people. And that's really the goal of understanding exceptional. I'll give one quick example here, just on an anecdotal basis here, kind of to frame it one more way. Take something like alcoholism, right? I would suggest to you that if you asked anyone, or nearly everyone who's struggling with alcohol, hey, is this a good thing? Are you proud that this is happening? Is it impacting your life in a positive way? Is this something you're choosing to do, right? Like this. I think everyone would say no. Actually, geez, I wish I didn't have to rely on this mechanism for whatever it's giving me, because, oh my gosh, it's disrupting so many aspects of my life, whether people acknowledge it or not. Sometimes it takes a while to acknowledge that that's actually the source that's so disruptive to their life. But what ends up happening is we say, well, alcoholism, you're sick. You are very sick. You have a mental illness, you have a disorder, you have a disability, you have all these negative things. Now, I will absolutely agree with you that behavior of consuming alcohol is very disruptive, and it is very negative on many, many levels. But the moment you move out of it's a disorder, you're sick, you have a mental illness, it's a disease, and you go into this is your brain. And by the way, alcohol, understandably, that is the fastest fire hose out there. That is the fastest way to cool off an overheated brain. So the fact that you're drinking alcohol, it's not great. It doesn't mean you're broken. We all know that so many good people, golden-hearted, wonderful human beings have struggled with addiction. But addiction doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's not a choice. Now, there's elements of choice when we seek that. But if we got out of the framework of pathology, disorder, illness, disability, and into neurology, we need to recalibrate your neurology. Alcohol is the fastest way on the planet to do it, but oh my goodness, it just obliterates so much else in your life. Now, there are different ways for you to get the inhibitory neurochemicals you're seeking. Would you be open to doing that? I'm not calling you a bad person. I'm not saying you're sick, you're disabled, you're mentally ill. You're using that substance to get the neurochemistry at a level that allows you to feel calibrated or balanced for even a short period of time, so that you're not overthinking, or you're not worried, or you're not depressed. So every behavior has a source, and the source is always the brain, always, and it communicates something. This is where we have to get to. If we don't get here, in my view, psychology and psychiatry go away, because we're not real. Until we go back to, you can't have a psychological construct without a brain. You can't do anything psychiatrically unless you have a brain. So let's start there. Let's go forward from there. Hopefully we can get a strong movement behind this, because once we do, we're going to do some good things, and we're literally going to find cures as opposed to long-term treatments. The antidepressants and the anti-anxieties and the stimulants, they're all symptom managers. None of them are related to long-term change via a short-term interval. And we need to get there. I think most people would agree with that. All right. It seems like there has been a movement towards spirituality of late. For families like ours, where does spirituality fall in relation to the brain? All right, so this was a specific family, obviously referring back to their experiences, but I love the question nonetheless. So spirituality. I think in the question, it was worded very nicely. I think the world is becoming more and more divided. Can anyone deny that? Everything is almost, you're one side or the other. And we need to get out of that line of thinking, especially in a field like this, because there isn't a right and wrong in many, many cases. And usually somewhere in the middle is the right place to be. And I'm not trying to push any agenda here in any way, shape, or form, political or otherwise. It's just we're so divided, and then we just, everything is attention, everything is division, everything, it's right or it's wrong, you're cool or you're not cool, it's fashionable, it's unfashionable, you're because you do this, you're that, if I see this, you must be that. Oh my goodness, we just need to pull back. And so I think what's happened is, in this divided world where you can't really trust other people, because it's like, oh my gosh, what if I say this? Are they going to think I'm going inward? And I think spirituality is fundamentally critical in all of psychology, because there are so many ways that inward reflection, especially as we get into adolescence and adulthood and beyond, it's much harder for kiddos to go inward. They're still relying on that external world to start to provide them with the structure to develop their brain to understand reality and those types of things. But if we embed spirituality, whatever that may mean, I'm not going any direction in terms of what that word might mean, but spirituality can play a critical role in brain health. Whether it's through breathing or processes like meditation, or it's another spiritual element that's meaningful for you or your family. The spirituality piece and the inward reflection is profoundly impactful, and in terms of supporting brain functioning, brain health, brain chemistry. And so I think that's why we've gotten here. We've gotten to this point where, since the external world is so hot, let me take some time and explore this internal world. And frankly, in most cases, I think the internal world is where most of our answers lie. Obviously we want external supports, and we need to do things externally in certain situations. And there's a lot of external aspects of reality that are very important. Our friends and our family and our loved ones, the ones we trust, all are hugely important. But at the end of the day, those people know more about your internal state. So again, reflecting inward, using spirituality, whatever that may mean for you, as a mechanism for positive change is profoundly impactful. Again, examples being meditation or yoga, or just journaling your thoughts, or whatever it may be. This is where we go. We reflect inward to change our brain chemistry, to change our human experience. So I think that's a great question, something we'll go into more. One of the things that stood out about you when working with our son was your sense of humor and your honesty. How does that play a role in what you do? So for me, I think the sense of humor comes in. That was always my go-to, as far as it was really kind of a coping mechanism, because I knew I wasn't going to impress too many people with my reading. I knew I was not going to be part of the National Honor Society, so I wasn't going to get much social interaction there. So humor for me was kind of an outlet, a distraction, and it hopefully is something that stuck with me. I think humor for me, I'm able to use it with the kids I work with quite a bit, because I think I have a better view of their perspective than many that might be more academically oriented in my field, psychology, psychiatry, education. So I think my having been there, it allows me to maybe joke a little bit more about it. And I also think that humor is disarming, and it shows individuals who may be nervous about an evaluation or the experience itself that there's nothing to worry about here. We're going to have some fun. We're going to figure out how your brain's working, what kind of vehicle we got rolling up there, and then we're just going to figure out what tools we need. You're still going to have to work hard. You're going to have to put the effort in and follow the rules. But we might have a whole new way of looking at things, so that when you apply your hard work, it pays off for you. And I think humor is a huge part of helping people to feel more at ease, and then thereby you get better information from them when you're working with them. Honesty, same thing. I have a hard time regulating, and so a lot of times I've said something to my families, and within a millisecond I'm thinking, wow, I might have shared too much there, but it's too late. So then I've just learned, all right, it's just part of who I am. So I'm going to be honest in all aspects. I will be that through anything and everything I do, because it's the greatest freedom you can have is just being honest. If you don't have to construct a lie, you just kind of be honest. And of course, you want to be delicate. I'm not always honest in every situation, of course. But in cases where I'm interacting with families and whatnot, if they ask me a question about my experience or about what I think or anything, I'm going to give them my honest answer because that trust is so important to me. So honesty is fundamental in all of this. Honesty through the community here, understanding exceptional. Honesty is going to be a foundational pillar here, because without honest discussions, if we have some other agenda or we hold back because we don't want to take anything in a direction where we can't do that. If we want real solutions, we have to have honest discussions. Sometimes people don't agree with each other, and that is 100% acceptable. It just needs to be done respectfully and in the right ways. But disagreement is never a bad thing if it's done in the right context and with the right spirit. And we'll do that here at Understanding Exceptional. So honesty is hugely important in all of the human experience, at least it has been for me. You have a dog, Iggy, at your practice. Have you always had a dog working with you? And what role do you think Iggy plays when you are working with kids? So we do have a dog at my practice, Iggy, who is just a fluffy love machine. He gives out nothing but love energy. And here again, the role it plays is it's just really, really helpful, particularly when working with kids. They hear the word doctor. A lot of kids that I'm working with, like myself, have sticky brains. Most kids are going to link up doctor with a shot. Do I have to get a shot? No, I don't think you do. And those kids are going to say, you don't think I do, or you know I don't, because if you don't think, that's not the same as knowing. So now I don't want to go. And it can be overwhelming coming in. What is this guy going to make me do? What's the situation going to be like? Is he going to make me sit here the whole time? Is he going to have bad breath? Is there going to be loud noises? So out comes this just fluffy ball of love and positive energy, and it tends to a lot of times bring things down very, very quickly. And kids are thinking, well, if this thing's running around the whole time, this can't be that bad. Of course, there are instances where there's fears and experiences that have been negative in the past, and we certainly work with those. But Iggy just brings positive energy, and I think animals are immensely powerful sensory tools and therapeutic tools. I think animals, so many of the kids I work with, particularly that have sensory overexcitabilities, animals are maybe one of the best interventions that you can come up with. Especially, they have to be the right animal, right? They have to have a good temperament and be patient, and then texture-wise, like Iggy's really fluffy and cute and sweet. So you'll see repetitively a lot of kids and myself doing the exact same thing repetitively, because there's a sensory element to that that's very calming and very regulating. So I think that's an area we need to explore more, is the value of animals and the positive energy and the sensory interventions they can provide. And so interesting questioner about Iggy, our rock star. He's the most popular one at the office, and it's not even close. And I don't blame people or parents for that, because he's the best there, best therapist we have there, no question. So as part of the community, I'm going to try to start an Iggy cam where he carries around a little GoPro or something. You can kind of see what he's up to during the day, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. I think this is the last question. What are your future goals with Understanding Exceptional, and how can parents get involved? So the goal is what I've expressed throughout this very, very long, tangential, soapbox, into the weeds, down the rabbit hole discussion. The goal is positive change, period. And the way I see it, I don't have all the answers. I will tell you that right from the start. I'm not sure I have any of the answers, but I have ideas. And ideas promote opportunities, and opportunities lead to greater levels of success. And that's what I want to accomplish. Having worked in the private setting for so long, I love and I value and cherish every moment I have with every family I have. At my private world, I have the greatest job on earth. I get to go in and work with amazing human beings, many of which have, 6-year-olds generally have a more sophisticated sense of humor than I do. So we usually just have a great time. I'm so blessed to be able to do that. I'm blessed to be able to, and I feel so fortunate to be able to potentially play a role in a positive, making a positive change, and for the kiddos and teens and occasionally young adults that I work with. So my goal has always been positive change to enhance the overall human experience for all those willing to put the effort in, that desire, deserve, and want success, figuring out what are the obstacles to those success with the effort, figuring out what those obstacles are, and then knowing that those obstacles begin in the brain, and those behaviors are communicating something. So let's figure out what kind of brain you have so we know what tools we need for you to be successful. And then we'll figure out, doggone it, what is the word that we need to use to get to the tools. But hopefully in the not too distant future, the word will be much less important than just the recognition of why we're having the experiences we are, so that we can get more quickly to the tools that everyone needs to be happy, healthy, and successful again. So I'll close with, we can do this together. Understanding Exceptional is the continuation of a project that started with two good friends of mine through a book, and it's the continuation of that project, and it's with the goal of getting it out to large numbers of people, to create a positive movement, to change the human experience in positive ways going forward. So I really appreciate you hanging in there with me through this, and I want to invite and welcome anyone and everyone that wants to be a part of that positive change at Understanding Exceptional. You can go to understandingexceptional.com. Eventually we'll have memberships there. There'll be a lot of resources there, ways to connect, resources for school and some of the things I talk about, and podcasts and different things. Super excited because this is my passion. So hopefully I can parlay my passion into something that's meaningful for you as well, and we can create a community that creates positive change. So thank you again.